Hello and welcome to Lily Knits. If this is your first time watching one of my videos, my name is Elnar and I'm the creator behind Lily Knits, a website where I share free patterns and tips on all things related to knitting and crochet. And today I'm going to show you how to knit with two colors using slip stitches. Slip stitch color work is a really easy and fun way to work with more than one color without having to juggle two yarns at the same time. It helps you add beautiful geometric patterns to your knitting and is perfect if you've been wanting to try color work but weren't sure where to start. This tutorial goes along with my Kensington throw pattern, which I've linked to in the description of this video below, but you can use this technique for all kinds of projects once you get the hang of it. All right, let's get started. I'll begin with a quick summary of how we can use slip stitches in color work. So if you haven't worked a pattern that uses slip stitches yet, don't worry. Slipping stitches in knitting is super easy. All you do is pass the stitch from one needle to the other without working into it. And with slip stitch color work, you knit with one color at a time and switch colors every 2 rows as if you were knitting stripes. When you hit a stitch that needs to be the other color, the one that you're not using right now, you just slip it instead of knitting it. That's all there is to it, and creates such a cool effect without having to carry 2 yarns across the row. As I said earlier, this tutorial goes along with my new Kensington throw pattern. And to keep this video short, we'll knit the pattern but make it much smaller so that we have a small square swatch at the end. Knitting a swatch is also a great way to check your gauge and to practice a new stitch before attempting a full-size project. The first step, as you may have guessed, is to cast on your stitches. To keep this video to the point, I'm going to assume that you already know how to cast on. And I'm using a long tail cast on, but feel free to use whichever cast on method you prefer. As long as it has some stretch to it, you're good to go. I'm also using circular knitting needles with a 32-inch long cord, since that's what I use for the actual blanket. Blankets are big, and circular needles have a long cable that can accommodate a lot more stitches than straight needles without everything feeling cramped or falling off. Okay, so if we were making the full-size blanket, then we'd cast on 177 stitches. But since we're making a much smaller version, I'm going to cast on 25 stitches. As long as you cast on a multiple of 4 plus 1, you're good to go. Now that the stitches have been cast on, we're ready to begin knitting the bottom border, which is 2 rows of seed stitch. So seed stitch is just a textured stitch that's created by alternating knit and purl stitches both across rows and between rows to create a bumpy seed-like texture that looks the same on both sides. So it's a great border stitch since it doesn't curl at the edges like stockinette and it's easy to memorize. We'll begin by knitting the first stitch and then alternating knits and purls all the way down the row. And I usually knit continental, but I know a lot of you knit the English way, so I'll try to use both methods throughout. Now that I've knit the first stitch, I'm going to purl the second stitch. And then just continue alternating knits and purls until you've reached the end of the row. And you should end on a knit because we have an odd number of stitches. Okay, I'm moving my yarn to my other hand so that I can knit continental because I knit much faster this way. Once you've completed the first row, your work should look like this. So it just looks like a bumpy row of alternating knits and purls. Pretty simple. And we're going to do this again for row 2. Knit the first stitch and then alternate knits and purls down the row and ending in a knit stitch. And then once you have completed the first 2 rows, the bottom border is done. And we can switch to color B and begin knitting the slip stitch colorwork section of this pattern. This is what the bottom border should look like once rows 1 and 2 have been knit. And now the next step is to start knitting row 3 with the second color, which is black in this case. And there's really no need to cut the yarn for the first color since we can just carry it up the side. We'll be switching colors every 2 rows, and I'm sure you can imagine how messy it'll be if you keep cutting the yarn every time you switch colors. So don't worry, there's no need to do that. And then you don't have to weave in any ends at the end except for, when you run out of yarn and have to start a new ball. But this will make it very minimal. So leave the white yarn and then insert your right hand needle into the first stitch to knit it. Then hold the second color in front of the first color and knit the first stitch. and you can pull the ends to tighten the stitch once you have knit that first stitch. So it's going to be a little loose, but don't worry, you can go back and tie it up later. And then you want to purl the next stitch. So we're doing a knit one and purl one at the beginning of every row to maintain that seed stitch border that we had worked at the bottom border. So the first 2 stitches at the beginning of every row and the last 2 stitches at the end of every row will be seed stitch, and they'll just be with one color, whatever color you're working with. When reading a pattern, the section after the star until the semicolon is what is going to be repeated down the row. So the first step is to slip that first stitch with the yarn held at the back. And the reason we have to hold the yarn towards the back is because if we held it towards the front, it would cover the stitch that we're slipping. So we hold the yarn at the back and then slip that first stitch purlwise. So you're slipping it as if to purl. And by slipping the white stitch, we're making sure that this stitch remains white, even though the current color that we're knitting with is black. Once you've knit a couple rows, you'll see what I mean. But basically, every stitch that you want to be the color that is opposite of the color that you're working with is a stitch that you slip. And then the rest of the stitches are just knit, like if you were knitting in stockinette stitch with the color you're working with. For this row, we slip the first stitch and then we knit the next 3 with our current color. It's a 4-stitch repeat, and we work this all the way down the row, slipping 1 stitch with the yarn held in the back and then knitting the next 3 stitches. And then once you have worked your way down the row, you'll notice that there are 3 stitches remaining. And what you want to do with those last 3 stitches is the very last 2 are part of the border, but the last stitch before the border is going to be slipped. And that's just to maintain symmetry, since the first stitch of the row was slipped. It just looks prettier if it's mirroring the beginning of the row, if that makes sense. And then purl 1 and knit 1 to maintain that seed stitch border on the other side. Now turn your work and we're ready to begin row 4. Now's a good time if you want to tighten that other side where you'd attach the color and tie a little knot so that it's nice and secure and the yarn doesn't slip out. But it probably won't slip out anyways. It's just if it's bugging you, you can tie it up. In row 4 and every even numbered row is really easy, because all you're going to be doing is, of course, doing the border stitches, and then we're going to purl all of the stitches that we had knit so that they are still in stockinette stitch. But the stitches that we slipped, we're going to slip them again. But this time we're going to hold the yarn in the front, because if I don't hold it at the front, I'll be covering up the stitch on the right side of the work. There'll be a strand of black yarn going across it. That's why we hold the yarn at the front on the even numbered rows, which are the wrong side rows in the back of the blanket. So that's where we want to keep the black yarn, because we want the white yarn that's been slipped to show as a stitch on the other side. And now that it's been slipped, we can purl the next 3 stitches to complete that 4-stitch repeat. So we're just going to slip 1 with the yarn held at the front and then purl the next 3 until we reach the last 3 stitches. And then again, once we have gone down the row and there's 3 stitches left, we're going to slip that last stitch before the border stitches, purlwise as always, with the yarn held at the front of our work, and then purl the second last stitch and knit the last stitch so that we maintain our border. And that's basically slip stitch color work. So when you're following a pattern for slip stitch color work, anytime you're slipping a stitch, you are saying that that stitch is going to remain the same color as it was from the row below. And all of the other stitches are just worked in stockinette stitch. I know it's still a bit tricky to visualize how the slip stitches will look, but trust me, once you finish rows 5 and 6, it'll all start to make sense. And since we're switching colors every 2 rows, we can switch back to the white color now. When switching colors, always bring the new yarn in front of the old one to trap it. This keeps the edges looking neat and tidy. So remember to bring it in front. And now we can knit and purl the first 2 border stitches for row 5. Row 5 and every odd numbered row after that is worked the same way as row 3, but the order of the knit and slip stitches in the repeat changes to create the design. So remember in row 3 we had slipped the first stitch and knit the next 3? For row 5, the first stitch is going to be knit, since it should stay white. Then we'll slip the next stitch to make it black and knit the next 2 to keep them white. That's it. Continue with this 4-stitch repeat until you have 3 stitches remaining. The third last stitch is going to be a knit stitch so that it mirrors the first stitch. And then the last 2 border stitches will be a purl followed by a knit. If we look at the swatch now, notice that the stitches from row 3 and 4 that had been slipped are white amongst the black stitches that were the main color for those rows, which is exactly what we want. Now turn your work and begin row 6. Remember, this is a wrong side row, so this means that after the border stitches, all of the stitches that are the same color we are working with will be purled, and all of the stitches of the opposite color will be slipped with the yarn held towards the front of your work so that it's not covering the stitch on the right side. So you don't even need to look at the instructions when you're working a wrong side row. All you're doing is working over the stitches of the pattern that you had knit from the row before. So if you see a stitch of the same color, you just purl it, and if you see a stitch of the opposite color, you slip it. And don't forget to work those last 2 stitches in seed stitch. Now you can really see how the slip stitches are forming on the swatch. They're slightly larger than regular knit stitches, but the difference is subtle and blends in nicely, and you really won't notice too much on a bigger project. And we're able to add a contrasting color to the row without having to carry another yarn across and knit with 2 colors at the same time, which makes this a great intro to color knitting. So when we knit the next 2 rows, the slip stitches carried from the black rows will show up similarly on the white rows we had just finished. And that's it. Now you know how to use slip stitches to add color work to your knitting. I'm going to knit the next 4 rows of the pattern without explanation, since they're pretty much the same except for the location of the slip stitches. It's an 8-row repeat, so rows 3 to 10 should be repeated until you have a swatch that's about the size of a square, and then we will finish it off with a seed stitch top border. And of course, don't forget that in the description of this video, I've linked to the pattern on my website, and you can see the full pattern there. So for this video, just watch it and then you can go back to the pattern and everything is written out for you. Okay, while I knit these next few rows, I just want to say that if you're enjoying this tutorial and the other content that I share on YouTube, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the Lily Knits channel. It truly makes my day to see that my videos are helpful, and also that's how YouTube knows how to share my videos with more knitters like you guys, and it allows me to keep creating free patterns and tutorials. Okay, we're almost done. So once you have a almost square-sized panel, you can start the top seed stitch border. So it's just worked exactly like the bottom seed stitch border, which is alternating knits and purls. And you're going to start each row with a knit stitch and end each row with a knit stitch. So just knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl all the way down, and then all the way back for 2 rows, and then cast off the stitches to finish off the swatch. There you go. You've just finished a miniature version of the Kensington throw, and you are now capable of slip stitch color work. And if you've made it this far, you now have all of the skills you need. You're officially ready to cast on the real thing.